On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, prompting the United Nations Security Council to declare war on the northern aggressor. On July 12th, 3 Canadian destroyers were dispatched to Korean waters under United Nations command. The following month, the Canadian government authorizes the recruitment of the Canadian Army Special Forces. And on November 25th, the 2nd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry set sail for what awaited them in Korea.
When we came to Busan in 1950 in December, we had just barely completed our basic training. So we went to Muryang and we spent 6 weeks there for advanced training and did a lot of mountain climbing and hill climbing or whatever. They weren't really mountains, or by Canadian standards, they were hills. We were there all day, and about 10 o'clock at night, we heard the old bugles starting to blow, and they came in.
The Battle of Kapyong is very, very significant. It represents a number of things. Once again, the Patricias are the very first Canadian regiment to deploy in December 1950. The battalion went there fully expecting to carry on occupational type duties because the United Nations had managed to push back the communist forces as far back as they did. Again, they adapt as the situation adapts because things had radically changed. The Chinese had started another major offensive. But he realized he had to change, and he needed the time to carry on with guerrilla warfare training, more advanced tactics training, and weapons training. So off they go. By the time they get to the Kapyong Valley, the situation is horrible. The night before Kapyong, they watched the 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment get severely infiltrated and eventually have to withdraw. In the meantime, the United Nations forces are realizing that they need artillery and they need it fast. So they come in behind the Patricia's positions, and then come the Battle of Kapyong, the fight is on. They get engaged early in the evening, and then by dark, it's horrible. You're looking at hundreds of Chinese coming in at 15-minute intervals, and they're infiltrated. Not quite as bad as what happened with the Australians the night before, but it's desperate, and eventually they end up calling artillery fire on their own position. They did that twice through the Battle of Kapyong. At one point, one of the barrages lasts over 40 minutes, and there are literally thousands of artillery rounds called in on that 40-minute period. They're repelled, leaving thousands of dead Chinese in front of their position. In the end, they only suffer, and I say only, it's relative to all the other battles that the Patricias have fought in, but there's 10 killed in action, a number wounded. Kapyong to Korea was what Vimy was to the First World War, or Normandy in the Second World War.
It was fought entirely by volunteers, so the guys that went over because they wanted to be there. They were basically, except for some NCOs and officers who had some Korean War experience, most of the guys were guys from the street. They were just ordinary, they were kids out of high school, they were people who were looking for something adventurous. They were a unique army. They signed up for a year and a half. The Americans, who were largely draft troops, were amazed that we would send soldiers to Korea to fight in a war because they actually wanted to be there. And you might be interested in knowing the Army brass in Ottawa felt very wary about these guys. They felt uneasy about having soldiers that actually wanted to fight. I, as a non-soldier, thought that would be exactly the kind of guy you'd want. The Army brass didn't. They looked upon this first batch of guys as mercenaries and adventurers and used those phrases to describe them. In fact, they were arguably amongst the most effective troops we sent to Korea, and everybody said they were just a wonderful group of guys.
Yeah, not a problem.
I followed 36 members from 2PPCLI to tour the area to see firsthand where the fighting took place.
60 years today, 2PPCLI was in the fight for their lives here in the Kapyong Valley.
The Battle of Kapyong is central to our culture, to our ethos. It's something we celebrate, and in places like this, we actually see the ground that they fought. It's something really special for us. In the 2nd Battalion PPCLI, Kapyong is central to our identity. Our barracks are named Kapyong. We wear the Presidential Unit Citation every day, and we've read lots of books. We know the history inside and out, and we've heard all the stories from the veterans. And to walk the ground and actually feel the steepness of the hills walking up to Bravo Company, up to Alpha Company, seeing the approaches that the Chinese came, and the adversity. You can visualize it, and it really put this whole 60th anniversary in perspective. In walking that ground, I could see the veterans that are here doing that with their kit, and tried to imagine the feelings that they had when thousands of Chinese approached their position. It was outstanding.
It's until you're really there, you don't understand or get the scope of the challenges those veterans had faced 60 years ago. The grades were 45, 60 degrees, and just us marching up there without any equipment was exhausting in itself, and then to get up into those positions and see what they were up against, it was just an amazing experience. And to see some of the old trenches still there, you get to kind of step back in time 60 years ago and get a picture of kind of what they faced, except we were well rested, fed, you know, and these guys faced hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers. So I can't imagine it, but it was a very good experience.
Kapyong Day started with a ceremony at the Korean War Memorial for the Canadian Forces, where many veterans were on hand to witness the praise that the Korean people had for them.
Not only you, if you get old, I'm old too, but your sons and grandsons, please come back to see how much changed Korea. From the bottom of heart to welcome your next generation. Always. Thank you.
It was here that Canadian vets presented memorial scholarships to Kapyong Buck middle school students.
Is standing at the memorials in Kapyong and looking up at the company position I was on. And I'm not a hero at Kapyong, but I did 50 patrols and commanded about 6 of them. Fired on about 6 times. But when we withdrew from Kapyong, I was a corporal commanding a section, just turned 20 years of age, and I led the battalion out. And in fact, I remember my company sergeant major, Doug Acton, when he said goodbye to me, I could tell, and he confirmed it later, he never expected to see me again. But fortunately, the Chinese had withdrawn, and the route I picked to lead the battalion out, because of, you know how a battalion advances, I picked a good route.
Prior to the ceremonies in Korea, members of 2PPCLI and some of the Korean vets took part in a ceremony at Radar Hill National Park in Tofino, BC.
There is blood on the hills of Korea. 'Tis blood of the brave and the true. Where the 25th Brigade battled together under the banner of the red, white, and blue.
It was on the 24th of April, 1998, a monument was erected and dedicated to the Canadian and PPCLI sacrifices in the Korean War, particularly the Battle of Kapyong. This national park that looks over the Pacific Ocean is twinned with Haeyo Haesang Sea National Park in Korea.
In 1975, the people of the Republic of Korea showed their eternal gratitude by erecting this stone monument. It was designed by a prominent Korean architect, and it was paid for by 3 Korean associations. In November 1975, when it was unveiled and dedicated, Colonel Jim Stone, former CO of the 2nd Battalion at the Battle of Kapyong, was present.
A ceremony took place at the Korean National Cemetery, where Canadians and their allies from the Korean War went to pay their respects to Korea's heroes. It is a national holy place where over 160,000 soldiers and other patriots rest in peace. Canadian, American, New Zealand, and Australian vets marched to the city of Kapyong to the United Nations Memorial Site, where they're met by thousands of people waving flags and showing their gratitude for all they've done for their freedom. Members of 2PPCLI were presented a plaque from the people of South Korea to mark the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Kapyong, to mount in the battalion lines back in Shiloh, Manitoba.
We marched through the city of Kapyong. Leading, we had veterans from 2PPCLI, 3rd Royal Australian Regiment, a contingent from the New Zealand Army and the American Army. And the streets were lined on both sides with citizens and also soldiers of the 1st Republic of Korean Division. And specifically right in front of our formation, we had 3 veterans from 2PPCLI in vehicles leading us, and just to see their faces and waving at the Koreans, especially the citizens of the Kapyong, was something else. It was definitely a proud moment.
It's hard to believe that this modern country was in ruins 60 years ago after taking a 3-hour bullet train ride from Seoul to the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Busan. 2,300 brave soldiers from various United Nations countries, including 378 Canadians, lie here in rest after giving their lives for freedom.
On this wet and soggy day, veterans and members of 2PPCLI gathered to mark the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Kapyong here at the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Korea.
When we got there, it was pouring rain, very emotional to walk into that field of guys. And I met Warren Silva, who was extremely helpful to take us down to the graves and help me look for some of the guys that I wanted to honor. I had picked up 4 flowers from a vase as we went down. As I found some of the guys, I laid the flower down and talked to them a bit. Ran out of flowers, hung on to one that I wanted to give to a special friend of mine from Manitoba who was killed in July 13, 1953, just a few weeks before the armistice was signed. Harry LaValle. He was a Métis guy from Manitoba. We were looking for him as we went up and down the lines up above where the main graves were, and we couldn't find him. But when we came to the end of it, Warren Silva asked the other patricians in the area to find him for us. So they just spread out and found him down way below the others. There's about 5 or 6 guys down there that I don't know why they're buried there, but Harry was there, and the guys told us there he was, and that was very emotional that they helped me find him. So there were so many memorable moments that it's hard to pick any one of them. Certainly at the cemetery, it had its own sense of emotion and tears and what have you.
Yeah, it's been very emotional. I've had a great-grandfather pass away in the Mariang Sang. He was killed in action. So going out to the UN cemetery in Basun was very much something I've always wanted to do.
Tremendous week. Very thankful for the Korean people that do what they've done for us. It was also understanding for us what we did. When we were 19 and 20, we didn't give a about what we were supposed to do. We just did it, so, you know.
I'd do it again if I knew. Look what the people have today of Korea. When I went there, I was so devastated from the border of North Korea in South Korea and the North Korea borders, all the way to the south to Busan. There was nothing. Everything was demolished. The hotels and any big place all demolished. And when the boys went back lately, it looks better than any city in Canada.
After the armistice agreement was signed on July 27, 1953, the two Koreas remained divided on the 38th parallel and at a high state of readiness. The demilitarized zone, the DMZ, is 248 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide. It's a buffer zone. It is also known as the world's most heavily guarded border, with observation posts every 100 meters on South Korea's side.
Although the war was over 60 some odd years ago, the threat is still very much there. With the DMZ itself, I mean, you can tell the tension and all that, and the difference between North Korea and South Korea. It really brought, the reality of what's going on in Korea Peninsula as a whole.
After spending a full week touring around a grateful nation and seeing firsthand some of the terrain the members of the PPCLI and other Canadian vets had to fight through, makes me wonder if we'll see this sort of growth and prosperity in Afghanistan. Only time will tell.